Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. Something that's been very much on my mind and heart lately has been thinking about the impact of inflation on people living kind of their normal everyday lives. And for some people, there's a resilience in your financial structure, which is wonderful, where having your gas cost more and your food cost more and, eating out at a restaurant cost more and your utilities cost more and so on and so forth is something that is not very pleasing, but within the resilience of your overall financial situation. So my parents who worked really hard and, put money away are pretty much in a place where they're not best pleased with that, but neither do they have any real world concerns about it. And that's wonderful. Whether that's your position or not, one of the things that I think is important to do in this time is to work with some of the unseen side of things, the intention and the focus. And the first thing I'd really like to recommend is setting your intention to unplug from the collective fear and stress and anxiety. So it's okay if those feelings are up for you. It's really natural. But I don't want anyone to be burdened with trying to process the collective worldwide experience of financial uncertainty that is kind of in the ethers right now. There's a lot of stress and tension in the US. We're going into yet another contentious political cycle. And, in general, it's just a really loud time. Humans are under a lot of stress, and interestingly and inconveniently, a lot of us have the same themes of stress running through. And so it's the first time in my lifetime or experience, starting with when COVID kicked in, that so many humans were distressed about really similar things. And that creates a lot of loudness in the collective consciousness. So some really good ways to work with this. If you haven't already, it's a little bit more complicated. I won't try to go into it here, but thinking about having energetic barriers in your home. These are called wards. And one of the things that I kind of double down on in my home space so I can get this sense of energetically quiet sanctuary is having really good protections that filter out other people's thoughts and feelings so that the loudness of the world is filtered and the movement of the stars and the tides of energy and the energy of the moon as appropriate can still flow to me, but there's a sanctuary element. And I fill my home with things that feel good. In this case, crystals. I absolutely adore rocks and crystals. Their vibration is really consistent, so it gives me an anchor as I go through all the highs and lows of being human. And regular space clearing is super helpful. So get out the sage or the Palo Santo or essential oils or your singing bowl or chimes and use whatever practice feels good to you. If you don't have a favorite, you can Google it and lots of possibilities will come up fairly quickly. I like to wash my sheets with a little bit of salt just to really clear whatever I've been shedding and releasing in the dream time. So sometimes it feels like it's loud outside, but as we're going through eclipses and all these dynamic movements, sometimes my dream time gets really heavy and intense. So clearing my space and restoring it to the haven that I want it to be is a really important part of this. And then in addition to that, you may want to think about consciously unplugging from collective stress. Now, you may be in the boat of having some really legitimate, at the level of fact, financial concerns right now. So you may have been in a place where, getting the money to last as long as the month did was, a little bit tricksy. And now there's just been this finish line that got moved to a whole different place collectively. And ultimately, big picture, I hope that collectively as humanity, we have systems where we can, balance this. But on an individual level, I think that there are kind of two elements to this. There's our mindset and how we deal with the emotional side of things, and then there's the practical action. And in my experience, one of the big challenges of being able to pivot and get resourceful and feel empowered and the captain of our own ship is how much so many of us dislike big emotions. So that's coming back to the setting intention and focus. If you sit in your home quietly or a beautiful place in nature and just ask your guides or set intention, may I unplug from collective stress and anxiety? May I come home to myself? Please help me to filter out other people's emotions so I can just be with my own energy. And it's much more attainable to level the waters and find our center. And one of the challenges I think that arises with this kind of amorphous bad emotion is our brains have this thing where they're trying to keep us safe by moving us away from things that feel emotionally intense. And in some ways that's good, but what we want to avoid is having this low-level fear and panic running in the background. It hammers on our health because of the adrenaline and the cortisol. It messes with our sleep. It takes our executive brain offline. So at a moment when we really want to be connected to our guidance and seeing potential pathways forward and not terrified of change because, change just feels bad. When the instincts are activated, even something really wonderful like a much longed for vacation can also feel really, really scary. Our brain will think about all the terrible things that could go wrong and make up scary stories. So there's a lot to be said for leveling the waters, and you may have to go into it before you can come out of it. One of the things that I think sometimes happens with big emotions is we realize we have some fear or some distress. One of the traps to try to avoid is skipping what's underneath, which might be fear or sadness or helplessness or something that doesn't feel good. We don't get a lot of biological rewards, but we do get biological rewards for anger. Because if there's anger, we're being pushed toward motion. And as you know, having been around angry, unregulated people in whatever way in your life, those people often fly into action. They scream and yell at work, or they throw things, or they do something where they're compelled to action, but they're compelled to action in a way that damages relationships, respect, trust, things that get really problematic down the road. And so just notice, if you feel angry, by all means, have a safe container to stomp around and pound a pillow and be like, oh, I'm so furious and frustrated about the situation. And notice that after that wave moves through, because anger's fine, it just has a really short timeline where it's useful, where there's useful information. Stewing in anger really hard on the immune system. And so it's interesting, it feels better to kind of be in that righteous indignation, at least before you get tired, if you don't stay there too long, but it puts more of a toll on the body than just, say, hanging with grief. Like, grief and I are going to hang for a minute. So if you've got a big storm of emotions brewing, just know that if you empty the container, you'll have a lot more space to come to the other side, to complete a cycle and get into your resourcefulness. So there may be a storm of tears. You may end up, laying on your bed and shaking and doing some somatic release. There may be something that really needs to move with whatever set of tools and techniques you have. So I would invite you, if there's emotion stewing after you've unplugged from the collective and made sure it wasn't your own, to let your emotions move, to acknowledge them, to feel them, but to get really present with them, to put your focused attention, because a lot of times we just have numbing of one of these emotions that's just riding in the background, shortening our fuse, diminishing our emotional capacity to deal with whatever comes around the corner. And that is a very biochemically and emotionally expensive way to go through things. So if you're really scared about money in the background, I think it's really powerful to make a date to talk with yourself about it, to sit down and say, all right, on Friday at 2 o'clock, I'm going to have a meeting with myself and I'm going to process emotion and journal on my fears about money. And then I'm going to go into brainstorming and I'm going to think about how I could be resourceful. I'm going to give all of my capacity and my attention to wrangling with this incredibly complicated problem, if that's something that you need. Now, for some of us, you may just have it stop at the emotional level. Okay, I unplugged from the collective. I processed some of my emotions. I came back to center. My financial situation at the level of fact is just fine. Okay, cool. But for those of us who need to make a pivot, who need to find a way to create a little more flow in or a little less flow out, or in some cases, we might need a really big take apart on our world to get us to sustainability. I'm really passionate, whether we're talking about health or money or relationships or even our relationship to soul purpose, that we not be going down a path that kind of, if we were a train, was going to run the train off the tracks eventually. So if you're in a relationship and you're not coughing up a truth that's just building more and more and more resentment, you're on a path to something coming apart in a way that is much more abrupt and unpleasant. And for sure, some people hit bottom. If you're dealing with a health issue and you know what you need to be doing and you're not finding a way to do it, and it's exacerbating something that is life-threatening, there might be a wake-up call when you end up in the hospital, and that might be your pivot point. But I like the grace of pivoting earlier. And if you can't muscle it through with willpower, which a lot of us can't, how are you calling in the support and wisdom? Where are you finding books on Amazon or podcasts or a therapist or someone like me who can do shamanic healing, like I do extraction on things that we're addicted to, along with other shamanic work to help people to make a shift. And so if you're looking at your money situation and you feel like you're on a path where the future is going to be harder and worse over time and it's unsustainable, it's really good to get resourceful and make a pivot, but you're overcoming our sort of default of avoid hard emotions, numb, tune it out. And it can be a real act of courage to say, yep, I'm going to go into the fear and the terror because there's something on the other side. But when we're in the middle of it, it feels like there won't be something on the other side. It's that feeling of, if I start crying, I'll never stop. And if that happens, you probably need some different kinds of assistance. But for most of us, there's a beginning and a middle and an end to a round of emotional processing, especially if we have some good tools in that regard. And if you don't, it's really good to get some help with that. So in addition to not letting emotions stew in the background, my guides want to use the example of when I wrote my first book. So in the shower one day, which is a great place for me to get inspiration, they said, yeah, it's time to start writing a book. Start writing your book. And I didn't think I had enough wisdom, experience, knowledge, whatever to write a book. And they said, yeah, just do it. And I'm like, okay. So I sat down and started writing a book chapter by chapter. And in the back of my mind, there would be this voice that popped up going, this is going to be terrible. It sounds awful. It's so clumsy. People are, going to laugh at you, whatever. And I just had the clarity, I think my guides dropped it in, to say, what I'm doing right now is writing a book. And part of me that wants to protect my ego from public humiliation by, standing up. And growing up, I was in theater and I wasn't particularly talented. So the sense of, performance in front of people with only a moderate amount of talent and ability and the vulnerability of that. I still sometimes have these weird dreams of being so honored to have landed a part that's beyond my singing and acting capacity and the tension of that. But with this book, I just promised myself I would look at the finished product and then make a decision. Like, it was okay if it sucked at the end, and I just decided not to publish it. There were a lot of steps between here and there, but that was the deal. I was going to just do it. So when that voice came up, I had an appointment with it. It was unspecified, but it was there. And similarly, if there's a part of you freaking out about money, you can schedule these meetings with yourself and any other stakeholders to really tap into your resourcefulness. I think it's good to, again, level the waters emotionally so you can get your executive brain online, do a lot of brainstorming. And when you're working with either solving a problem of being on a trajectory where, you really don't have enough money for the way that you're doing life right now, or you're concerned about it and you want to step up your game, I think it's really useful in addition to looking at all the practical sides of things. I think this is a powerful and appropriate time to really up-level our energetic relationship to money and our ability to use our intention and our focus to get money to flow to us, and our inspiration and our conversations with the guides to be able to hear new possibilities. So one side of it that is very, very important is certainly practical right action. This isn't magical thinking. This isn't like, as long as you do law of attraction, you'll be just fine. But I think it's really useful to understand more deeply how these principles of energy and magic work with outcomes in a really clean, ethical, highest and best good of all concerned kind of way. So for example, it's really useful to understand that when it comes to money, law of attraction sits right next to law of vibration and law of assimilation. And if you don't have all three aligned, money may come to you, but it won't stay with you. It doesn't have the vibrational alignment to stay with you, and it doesn't assimilate. And what's interesting about modern humans is our ancestors, for the most part, didn't have a lot of mechanisms to assimilate wealth for the future. If you're a hunter-gatherer person without modern means of food storage, you were kind of like winter supplies was a thing, but beyond that, you weren't 2 or 3 or 4 seasons out. And as a farmer, there was a little bit more, okay, we've put all the food away for winter, but you weren't 3 winters out. And if the barn burned down, things could get really complicated. So if there was a bad season and there was a drought. So humans have generally lived hand to mouth, and we have the first time on the planet where this percentage of the population has secure access to food. Now, I don't think we're done solving secure access to food until everybody has it, but comparatively to a few hundred years ago, we've made ridiculously wonderful strides in how many people aren't having that uncertainty. And at the same time, there's, this kind of stress and overhead, because it isn't just about food. It's also about shelter and choice and, not having to live with relatives that you experience as, really a different vibration and really a different culture than, what you care for. There's a lot of opportunity to curate an existence and experience that works really well for us. I'm in San Diego outside in the hills, and I would say I'm in the best Katy habitat that I've ever lived in. And I'm also kind of paying through the nose for it. It is an expensive place to be on the planet, and I'm just present to the tension of, I really love living here and it really supports me. And if things were to go sideways in some way, I might at some point have to make a different choice. And so, knowing those, and honestly, I'd rather give up living in the San Diego area than give up having my own home. I really like not having roommates, and I really like not working in engineering. So we can kind of have those plans and those pathways in the back of our mind. But in the meantime, in the immediacy, it's really useful to understand how we can create a really good flow of money. So I mentioned the 3 laws. Law of assimilation is something new that we're asking our energy body to do, which is to create energetic space for money to hang out with us, because money in the form that it is in the modern era, you just don't have to go back very far to our ancestors or our past lives for it to look really different. So we're tuning our energy in a really sophisticated and new way to work with the modern era while still keeping our fundamental essential nature the same. So it's cool and powerful, and we're just needing to do some different things. Another thing that's really useful to understand is most humans lived and died very close to where they were born. And modern humans, not so much. Certainly there are people who do, but a lot of us, move around and choose again. So if you're living far from where you were born, you may need to retrain your root chakra to connect to the land that you're living on and to come into right relationship with that, rather than this experience of bonding with the root chakra with land as an infant and a child and developing a relationship that will be a lifelong relationship to that particular place on the land. Even nomadic people just didn't have that much of a range for the essential nature of the land, and they were cyclic, so they came back to it, again and again. As far as chakras, the root chakra and the sacral chakra are really good chakras to clean out and have vibrant and healthy. They do a really good job of helping us to work with money. Now, a lot of energetically sensitive, connected to spirit people don't have as strong a relationship to embodiment. They're just not all the way in their body, and this causes a lot of problems. Highly recommend working on being in your body as an ongoing goal. That's something that I've done a lot of work with because I was highly dissociative as a child and an adolescent. However, as we come into our body, a lot of times we don't have the strength of relationship to the lower chakras. So when it comes to money, we activate what's called our ways and means circuitry, which means everything kind of always works out somehow. You meet the right person who can help you with the car repair, and things move magically. So you can send out your magic from the upper chakras and your visioning and your calling in possibilities. And I love those circuits. By all means, use those circuits. But there's a lot to be said for just vibrant, healthy lower chakras that just work really well with money, that have a really good interface. So there's a lot of different ways to study this. If you're Wiccan, your approach is going to look really different. If you do shamanic journeying, you can go take counsel directly with the guides. Hey, how do I juice up my money channels? I want to make a couple of offers. I don't usually do this in podcasts, but one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm getting ready to offer a $25 healing on clear vows of poverty and heal your root chakra. But this podcast will undoubtedly be released after that goes. So the add-on that I created to that is my Money Mastery for Modern Times program. That's in my Shamanic Academy. And I've offered that for $97. It's all these modules that really break down how to work with money magic. If you'd like to learn about that from me, I'm far from the only person teaching it, but in my admittedly biased opinion, I really look for the most effective and the most efficient way of really working with these things. And I'm offering it to people who do that particular healing at $32 instead of the normal $97. And so what I want to offer is down the road, if you sign up for any of my $25 healings, there are all kinds of different topics. You can get on my mailing list and see what's coming up or check the what's next page. But if there's one that appeals to you, I'll give you the option of adding on the program at that discounted price. Just remind me that I said so in the podcast so that I remember. And I'll hold that offer open through the end of 2023. So you can check in with me about it if it's later than that, but I definitely want to make it available for the next year and change to anybody who is just really feeling like you need some training and want to work with the energetic side of things. Now, again, it's not this substitute for working with the really practical right action, trade your time and talent for money as efficiently as possible in the way that causes you the least aggravation. That's all really important too. Right action is really important, but we need to work so much less hard if we line up the energetics in the background and work with those. So I'm very much about this both and. Don't just work harder, work in this more elegant way so that you're working with the unseen energetic principles as well as right action, as well as the efficacy that you have to make movement and choices in the world. And I think it's a powerful time in whatever approach you take to cultivate a vision of yourself as resourceful and capable. And you may want to look at a hard time where you're like, wow, that really sucked. That was really awful. But this thing came in and I found this help and I asked for help over here and I found a new way to do things and I got through. It was okay in the end. So kind of going back over narratives of your own hero's journey story where you figured things out and you triumphed, you used your creativity, you used your resourcefulness. The more scared we are, the more disconnected we are from these aspects. And so consciously using our mind to reclaim them and to bolster our own awareness of our capabilities, I think, is really powerful. There was a book I really liked called The Source by Dr. Tara Stewart, and that's another great way to kind of go in and say, not just for money, although we're talking about money, but really across the board, how do you blend, she describes it as law of attraction meets neuroscience, which I really like. It's practical and engaging with the mystical, unknowable part of the world. One of the things that made a really big difference in my journey was getting really systematic about working on my money outcomes. So there was a point where I realized I'd grown up with a family culture with a lot of fear around money, and we always had enough. My parents figured it out, but the figuring it out had a lot of stress and tension and anxiety and arguments when my dad wrote a check for groceries and forgot to tell my mom, and then she bounced a check because she didn't know that this other money had come out for something they were totally in agreement on. Neither of them were spending money. It was just that they were, running really close to zero balance before the next paycheck. And so there was this ambient stress going in. And then the path of the entrepreneur had a lot of stress and fear about money. And the point at which I really managed to pivot that, I got really systematic about proactively doing work regularly. The way I personally did it was I set up a program. So if that works for you, you can gather some friends and say, hey, can I do some intention on all of our behalves? Or for people who've had a soul retrieval with me, I have a series of journeys I do. It's a program where I do group journeys and individual money boosts every month. And it's just a way for me to really systematically work with my own money outcomes as well as my clients' outcomes. And for me, having the offering is a good structure for me to focus on it. So whatever structure is good for you, you could use the fire ceremony that's on the articles page of my website to release fear and invite money to flow. You may want to set up a money altar where you're just setting up some objects that are working on drawing money in. There's a hoodoo ritual with a money honey jar that can be a really good way to work with principles that work well together to create an outcome. So there are many, many pathways with this, but my invitation to you is to get present with whatever emotion, unplug from the collective so you're not trying to process other people's emotions, so that there's that accessibility to get present with whatever degree of problem there is or isn't in your life, and then create from there the ability to get in touch with your executive brain and start brainstorming and being strategic, but also really inviting in wisdom and inspiration. And meanwhile, lining up the energetics so you don't have to work as hard. Earlier with money, I would lean on manifestation of like drawing money to me, which worked, but it was kind of this rise and fall where I'd hit a threshold of stress when not enough money was coming in and get really focused, and then money would move and I'd be back in the cycle. And what I've really attempted to develop is energy structures that just work really well with money, that also work really well with me being healthy. So having healthy, vibrant root and sacral chakras are really good across the board, and they really support my money outcomes. So whether we work together further or not, I hope that there's some inspiration or new possibilities. You may want to go through this more than once. This is a dense recording, because obviously I've worked with this a ton and I've thrown a lot at you. And if you get overwhelmed, just, run through, make a list, and then pick the thing that feels the least overwhelming or the thing that's going to make the most difference. And then you can circle back to other possibilities. But I really feel like it's a time where some of us, whether it's fair or not fair, or, whether the government has made bad choices or humanity's making bad choices or whatever the story, it's a hard thing that we need for some of us to get more resourceful about money and to make pivots in our lives. And amid all the experiences we're having of aging parents or children's school systems, or just coming out of COVID and getting hopefully back to normal, or whatever's on your stack, to have this piled on top of it, it's a hard thing. And I don't mean to silver line it or make light of it. I just hope to give you some tools and options that ideally will make it a little bit easier, make it be more in flow, utilize your guides to work on your behalf in the background, so the amount of effort and willpower and determination and working harder that you need to put in is kept to as minimal a level as possible. People come up with some really cool, resourceful things when there's situational stress, and people sometimes spiral down into, harder outcomes. It's easy to imagine that if alcohol provides a lot of immediate relief, the attraction of that might just be really up for you right now. So my deep hope is that this gives you some more options and opportunities to make the load not be as heavy as it might otherwise be, and to really see a path forward and really bring your resilience to the forefront. I sometimes think about inviting my inner wise woman to the helm, to the forefront, and taking counsel with her, where, my scared little girl gets to come along, or, the part of me that, the sky is falling. I'm holding compassionate space for that, but I don't want it in the driver's seat. And there's a lot of layers to this, but I hope that there's something in this quick survey of many different possibilities that gives you some inspiration or some support. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.